The sound was faint at first, a broken call that carried strangely across the dry woodland. It was not the long, confident trumpet of a herd, but a softer, uneven cry that trembled as though it belonged to a voice too small to carry far. The ranger paused on the sandy path, tilting his head. The afternoon was heavy with silence, the air thick with dust and heat, and the cry came again, a child's call, urgent, uncertain, drifting on the wind. He turned his eyes toward the tree line, and there, between the sparse acacia shadows, movement broke the stillness. A young elephant calf stumbled into view, its small body coated in dust, its ears hanging low as if weighed by exhaustion. It was alone. And in that loneliness there was something immediately wrong. Calves of that age never strayed far from their mothers. They clung to the safety of the herd, watched by a dozen eyes. Yet this one came forward with hesitant steps, limping, as though each movement carried pain. The ranger's breath slowed. His training told him not to rush, not to intrude. Elephants did not approach humans unless fear, hunger, or desperation pushed them beyond instinct. He stood quietly, letting the calf close the distance if it chose. The silence deepened around them, the buzzing insects seeming to fade as both man and animal fixed upon one another. The calf called again, a low, hoarse rumble that cracked midway through. Its trunk lifted slightly, then fell. Its head dipped low as if the weight of the world pressed on its neck. Dust clung to the small folds of skin, turning the natural gray into a pale, tired brown. Flies hovered at the corners of its eyes, which blinked with a weariness that seemed older than its young frame. The ranger noticed the limp more clearly now. The right hind leg dragged slightly, reluctant to bear weight. Each step left a deeper mark in the sand than the others, and when the calf paused, its body swayed as though balance were uncertain. The wound was not visible yet, but the pain was written in every slow placement of its foot. He whispered almost unconsciously, a sound softer than the breeze. "Easy now." His voice carried no demand, only reassurance. The way one might speak to calm a restless bird. He kept his arms at his side, posture open, showing no threat. The calf's ears twitched at the sound, and for a moment it froze, head angled toward him. Then, slowly, it shuffled forward again, the limp more pronounced as the space between them closed. The distance narrowed until the details sharpened. He could see the thin layer of sweat-darkened dust clinging to its flanks, the shallow rise and fall of its ribs. The calf's tail swayed weakly, not with playfulness but with fatigue. Its trunk brushed the ground, drawing small shapes in the sand as if the effort to keep it lifted was too great. Alone. That was the word that settled like a stone in the ranger's chest. To find a calf of this age wandering without the protective circle of its herd was rare, dangerous. Predators, thirst, and fear could unravel its strength in hours. The cry it gave now was thinner, fragile as cracked reed. The ranger knew then that whatever had driven it here had left it in urgent need. He took a slow step forward, deliberate and measured. The calf did not retreat. Instead, it swayed, then lowered itself slightly, knees bending, as if caught between collapse and a plea for recognition. Its dark eyes met his, wide and searching, reflecting both uncertainty and hope. It was not the look of an animal seeking food from a stranger. It was something deeper, an instinctive grasp for safety, for presence, for life beyond isolation. The ranger lowered his gaze, crouching slightly to reduce his size. The dry air stirred between them, carrying the mingled scents of dust and sweat, of wild grass pressed beneath feet too tired to wander further. He could hear the faint rattle of breath in the calf's chest, a reminder that stress and injury often walk together. The elephant shifted closer, trunk stretching toward him, trembling faintly as it hovered in the air. Then, with surprising gentleness, it touched the ground near his boots, curling slightly as though marking the moment. The ranger did not move, did not reach to close the distance. He simply allowed the space between them to settle into trust. A fly buzzed past his ear, the sound startling against the hush. The calf flicked its ear, slow and heavy, before lifting its trunk again, brushing against the man's arm this time. It was tentative, but it lingered, and the ranger felt the coarse, warm skin press against him like a silent request. "All right, little one," he murmured, hardly louder than the wind. The calf leaned briefly, shifting its weight so that its shoulder brushed against his leg. The gesture was clumsy, uncertain, yet deeply vulnerable. It was not dominance, not curiosity. It was surrender, a recognition that it could not continue alone. The ranger's chest tightened as he realized the depth of what this meant. Beyond them, the woodland stretched in pale shades of gold and gray, the late light bending long shadows across the ground. But within this small circle of silence, an understanding passed between species that rarely touched so directly. The calf's trembling eased slightly, though the limp remained. Its breath came slower, heavier, but steadier, as though it had found a brief pause from its fear. The ranger lifted his radio slowly, careful not to startle, and spoke into it in the calmest tone he could manage. His words were practical, but his eyes remained on the calf, on the fragile trust standing there in the dust. The cry that had first drawn him no longer echoed through the woodland. In its place was only the sound of quiet breathing, man and elephant sharing the heavy air, each holding still as the dry leaves whispered around them. And in that stillness, the ranger understood the story had just begun. The calf's breath came in short, shallow bursts, its trunk lifting and lowering in restless arcs as it drew closer to the man who had chosen not to move. Dust hung in the warm air between them, stirred by the hesitant drag of its limp. The ranger's stillness was not born of fear, but of deliberate patience. Each muscle softened, each gesture measured, as though he understood that one sudden movement could unravel what fragile trust had brought the young elephant this far. He lowered his body slowly, bending his knees until he was close to the ground. The gesture reduced his height, changing his presence from a towering shape into something less threatening, more in rhythm with the calf's uncertain eye. His voice followed, low and steady, carried not as command, but as quiet reassurance. "Easy. You're safe now." The words were not meant to be understood, but to weave calm into the heavy silence. The calf circled him cautiously, ears twitching with nervous energy. Its gait was uneven, the sore leg forcing it into a halting rhythm that left patches of darker soil where it dragged its foot. The animal's body trembled in small waves, skin shivering as though from invisible insects, though the trembling came from deeper within, the tremor of fear, exhaustion, and solitude. Its eyes flicked from the ranger's face to the ground and back again, as if torn between caution and need. The ranger kept his gaze steady but gentle, never reaching forward, never demanding. His posture remained grounded, weight anchored into the dust as though he had decided he could wait all day if required. Patience was his offering. In the wild, elephants measured trust not through haste but through the quiet of observation, through the willingness to share space without intrusion. The calf stopped a short distance away, trunk suspended in the air. It sniffed faintly, drawing in the stranger's scent, the sweat of his clothes, the leather straps, the faint iron tang of his tools. Its chest rose and fell unevenly, and with each breath came a faint wheeze, a sound that spoke of strain. The ranger heard it, and his own chest tightened, but his face revealed nothing more than calm. A few steps more, and the circle narrowed. The calf's ears spread slightly, not in aggression but in a timid attempt to appear larger, to mask the vulnerability that its thin frame betrayed. It let out a small, low rumble, half call, half sigh, and moved behind the man, dragging its trunk briefly across the dry earth as it passed. The ranger turned his head slowly, not to follow but to acknowledge, allowing the animal to test him, to decide on its own whether this space could hold safety. The tennies stretched, filled with nothing but the faint rasp of insects and the shifting of the calf's unsteady feet. At last, the circle drew smaller still. The elephant stepped closer, brushing against the edge of the man's shoulder with the side of its trunk. The touch was fleeting, uncertain, but real. A request, perhaps, for comfort without knowing what comfort meant. The ranger exhaled softly, his breath a steady rhythm meant to be felt more than heard. He did not reach out. He knew that such gestures must be given, not taken. And after a moment of hesitation, the calf leaned its head just slightly toward him. The movement carried weight, not physical but emotional, a shift from suspicion to fragile trust. Its skin, coarse and dry, pressed lightly against the fabric of his shirt before drawing back again. From this closeness, the ranger could see more clearly the lines of wear across the calf's body, the sunken space behind its eyes, the dirt matted along its side where it had likely lain down in the dust too long without its mother's nudge to rise. He saw the wound more clearly, too, a raw cut across the back leg, narrow but deep, an injury that explained both the limp and the separation. His heart sank, but his face remained composed, his body unshifting. "All right," he murmured softly, though his words carried no plan, no immediate solution. They were simply presence, a sound to fill the silence that pressed around them. The calf's ears twitched once more, and then it lowered its head slightly as though gravity itself pressed it toward the ground. Its body swayed, trunk brushing the man's arm again, this time lingering longer, heavy with the weight of surrender. Around them, the woodland stretched endless and indifferent, branches swaying gently under the breath of wind. Yet in this still circle, time seemed suspended. The ranger felt the trembling of the calf's body through each tentative contact, and in that trembling lay the silent truth. The animal had been alone too long, frightened too deeply, and now it leaned toward the first presence that had not turned away. He remained unmoving, allowing the calf to decide when to pull back, when to test the air again. The stillness was his language. Slowly, the animal stepped closer, resting its side against his knee for just a moment. The touch was uneven, almost clumsy, but the intention was clear. Trust was forming, fragile but real in the dust and silence of that fading afternoon. The ranger did not smile, did not celebrate. He only lowered his eyes, whispering once more, "You're all right now." And though the words dissolved into the dry air, the weight of them lingered, carried not by meaning but by tone. The calf remained beside him, ears flicking slowly, its breathing calmer now, though still heavy with fatigue. The woodland around them had not changed, yet something had shifted deeply in the quiet exchange. The distance between a wounded animal and a waiting man had narrowed, and in that narrowing was a small miracle. One step closer to survival. The calf shifted its weight again, the trembling more visible now that it lingered near the ranger's side. Dust clung to its body in uneven patches, darkening where sweat had dampened the skin beneath. When it stepped forward, its hind leg dragged slightly behind, and the man finally saw what he had feared from the first signs of the limp. Across the thick gray skin, just above the joint, a wound stretched raw and angry. The cut was narrow but deep, the kind of injury that spoke of wire, the silent cruelty of a snare set in secret places. The edges were swollen, streaked with dried blood and fresh moisture where the skin struggled to knit itself closed. Every time the calf placed its weight on that leg, a tremor passed through its body, but it did not cry out. It only lowered its head, the heavy curve of the skull bowing toward the earth as if to surrender to the pain. The ranger kept his voice steady, barely louder than the brush of wind. "Easy now, just a look." He motioned for the others who had arrived quietly behind him. Their steps were slow, deliberate, leaving space between movement and sound. The team knew that haste here would be more dangerous than waiting. The calf's ears twitched as the men approached, its trunk lifted halfway, hovering uncertainly in the air, before lowering again to rest on the ground, The calf's eyes turned toward them, wide and wary, but it did not retreat. Instead, it stood, breathing heavily, as if its strength had already been spent in wandering alone. The rangers knelt a few paces away, scanning the wound without reaching out. They whispered brief words to one another, the quiet tones blending with the hum of insects in the grass. One man pointed gently, tracing the air above the calf's leg without touching. Another nodded, his expression weighted by the knowledge that snares, once set, caught more than their intended prey. They caught innocence, turning the wild into a place of hidden traps. The calf shifted again, leaning into its uninjured side. Its trunk coiled briefly against its chest, then uncurled, brushing the ground with slow circles. The movement was restless, uncertain, yet it stayed near. The ranger closest to it extended his hand only halfway, not to touch but to show calm intention. His palm rested open in the warm light, his body still as stone. Minutes passed in silence, the calf breathing harder with each moment. The wound pulsed faintly, a red line breaking the gray skin carrying the smell of iron. Yet no trumpet of distress rose, no panic broke from its throat. Only quiet exhaustion spoke in the lowering of its head and the heavy blink of its eyes. The rangers prepared what little they could. A kit was laid out slowly, every object placed on the earth with care. Gauze, water, antiseptic, small offerings in the face of suffering that had gone unseen. They did not rush toward the animal. They waited for it to accept the nearness of their presence, for its body to show whether it would resist or remain. The calf swayed again, ears flicking back against its head. Its breath rattled in its chest, not yet labored, but weighted by fatigue. The ranger murmured once more, his voice carrying only quiet. "It's all right. We'll help you." The words floated like dust in the air, not commands but comforts, spoken more for rhythm than meaning. The young elephant lowered itself slightly, knees bending as though gravity had become too strong. Its trunk brushed the earth, then lifted toward the ranger's knee. Pausing there, close but not quite touching. In that moment the men understood. The calf had chosen not to flee. It had chosen presence over escape. One ranger shifted forward, inch by inch, his movements practiced in patience. He knelt near the injured leg, keeping his head bowed to avoid the piercing weight of direct gaze. His hands did not reach yet. He studied the wound, watching how the skin opened with each step, how the edges darkened where infection threatened to take hold. He saw the thin threads of hair caught along the cut, fibers from the snare that had bitten deep before snapping loose. The calf flinched when a fly landed near the wound, its trunk twitching in irritation. The ranger froze, waiting for the tremor to pass, for the calf to settle again. Only when its ears lowered once more did he breathe out, motioning subtly to his team. They would not act yet. First, they had to earn stillness, to show the calf that hands could bring relief instead of harm. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ground. The calf's body seemed smaller in the fading light, its skin stretched thin where hunger had begun to etch its lines. The rangers exchanged glances, unspoken thoughts passing between them. Time mattered. The wound could worsen quickly if left untreated, yet urgency was a silent weight, not an excuse for force. The ranger closest shifted back onto his heels, creating space again. The calf responded by stepping forward once more. The limp, sharp, but endured. It moved its trunk to his shoulder, pressing lightly, almost testing the strength of the contact. The ranger did not flinch. He allowed the touch, a silent agreement that trust could live in this fragile exchange. Around them, the woodland remained indifferent, cicadas buzzing in the trees, leaves stirring against the hot wind. But in this quiet clearing, a story was unfolding. Not of dominance, not of conquest, but of recognition between the wounded and those who had chosen to wait. The calf's head lowered fully then, trunk curling loosely at its feet, eyelids heavy as though sleep pressed close. The rangers saw their chance beginning to open. The animal was not fleeing. It was asking, in the only way it could, for the stillness to be met with care. And in that silence beneath the weight of late afternoon, the truth of the wound spoke louder than any sound. It was not only a mark on the skin, it was a reminder of how fragile life in the wild could be, and how even the strongest creatures sometimes had no choice but to lean into the hands of strangers. The rangers waited until the calf's trembling had eased into something like stillness. Its head remained bowed, trunk curled loosely against the dust, as though surrender had been chosen simply because strength had run out. The men moved quietly, their tools already laid out with care, each one set in order upon the earth. None of them spoke loudly, even their whispers were measured, shaped to dissolve into the air before they could carry far. The lead ranger shifted closer, his knees pressing into the soil. He let the calf see him, his movements deliberate, nothing hidden, nothing sudden. The others circled just far enough to give space, their eyes trained not on the wound alone but on the young body that bore it. They knew that one wrong gesture could send it stumbling away, undoing all the fragile trust that had formed in the quiet moments before. At last, the ranger reached out, hand open, moving toward the injured leg. The calf flinched when his fingers brushed close, a quick shiver that ran through its skin, but it did not step back. It let him touch the air just above the wound, and then, carefully, he pressed his palm against the uninjured side of the limb, steadying it. With his other hand he poured cool water over the cut, letting the stream carry dust and dried blood away. The calf let out a low, broken rumble, not of anger but of pain contained. Its ears folded back, trunk twitching at its feet. The ranger paused, whispering softly, "Almost there." The sound carried calm, and the calf steadied, though the tremor in its body did not fade completely. The wound was angry and red, edges swollen from days of strain. As the water cleared the grime, the mark of wire became unmistakable. The line curved tight, as if the metal had bitten and refused to let go until the calf tore free. The ranger felt the heaviness of it. The knowledge that so many snares lay unseen, set to catch anything that passed without distinction. But he carried that heaviness in silence, focusing only on the task before him. Another ranger stepped forward, kneeling opposite, and together they began to clean more thoroughly. Cloths soaked in antiseptic were pressed gently to the wound, each contact slow enough to give the calf time to adjust. The animal shifted its weight, trunk lifting to hover briefly above the men as though testing their presence. Its eyes half closed, blinking slowly, and then it lowered its head once more, accepting. Every so often, a faint cry broke from its throat. Small, soft, but filled with the ache of endurance. The rangers worked through it, never hurrying, never breaking the rhythm of their hands. They pressed ointment into the cut, coating the raw flesh with something that would ease both pain and infection. Bandages followed, wrapped with care, each turn of cloth smooth and firm, but not tight. The calf leaned into the earth, body heavy with fatigue, but it did not fight. When the work was nearly done, the ranger closest to its head placed his hand lightly against its trunk. The calf responded by curling the tip against his arm, a brief gesture, unplanned, yet full of meaning. It was not gratitude as humans know it. It was a test of closeness, a measure of whether trust could hold under strain. The ranger did not move away. He let the weight rest against him, feeling the warmth of its skin, the faint tremor that still coursed beneath. The team finished binding the leg, securing the last edge of cloth. They stepped back slowly, giving the calf space again, watching to see if it would accept or reject what had been done. For a long moment, the animal remained still, eyes closed, breathing heavy but even. Then it shifted, testing the leg with a cautious step. The bandage held firm. Its trunk rose, brushing against the air, before lowering again toward the ranger who had stayed closest throughout. In that quiet, the calf leaned forward, resting its trunk fully against his arm. The gesture silenced every sound around them, The hum of insects, the whisper of grass, even the men's breath. It was a moment without words, a simple contact that carried more weight than anything they had done. The ranger did not move, did not speak, only bowed his head slightly, letting the touch linger. The calf's eyes opened, dark and tired but no longer frantic. Its ears flicked softly once, and then it stepped back, holding its weight steady on the newly dressed leg. The silence stretched between them, filled not with fear, but with fragile calm. The rangers began to gather their tools again, each movement slow, respectful. They did not crowd the animal, did not celebrate or break the stillness. They allowed the moment to exist for what it was. An act of trust born in the wilderness, fragile as dust, yet strong enough to endure. The young elephant lifted its head toward the fading light, then lowered it once more, trunk brushing against the soil as though marking the ground it now stood upon. The men watched quietly, knowing that healing would take time, that this was only the first step in a longer journey. But for now, the wound was cleaned, the pain eased, and the bond between man and animal had been sealed in silence. The ranger touched his own arm where the trunk had rested, the warmth still present there. He did not speak again. The moment required no words, and so they stood together, men and calf, in the late glow of day, while the wild stretched endless around them, carrying their quiet presence into the falling dusk. The night passed in stillness, broken only by the soft shuffle of the calf as it shifted its weight against the earth. The rangers kept watch nearby, their presence quiet, their fire small and distant so as not to disturb. The calf lay curled in the dust, trunk resting limply across its foreleg, breath deep and uneven but no longer frantic. The wound, cleaned and wrapped, held steady through the dark hours. Above, the sky stretched wide and clear, stars scattered across the silence of the wild. As the horizon lightened, the first calls stirred through the air. Low rumbles carried faintly across the open woodland, voices of giants moving together. The calf stirred, ears twitching at the sound, its head lifted, trunk rising slowly to test the morning air. Another call followed, deeper, resonant, rolling like distant thunder through the trees. The calf's body shifted with sudden energy, legs scrambling beneath it as though memory itself had been awakened. The rangers rose quietly, their faces turned toward the sound. They did not speak at first, only listened. The herd was near, not a rumor, but a presence carried on the dawn wind. The calf gave a small, wavering cry in answer, its voice thin but urgent, stretching as far as its strength allowed. It stumbled forward, bandaged leg dragging slightly, but determination steadied its frame. The men followed at a respectful distance, their steps unhurried, careful not to crowd the path. The calf moved ahead, ears wide. Trunk lifted again and again as it sought the source of the calls. Each sound drew it further, the limp slowing it, but never stopping. Its pace carried the weight of need, not merely for company, but for the bond of blood and herd that had shaped its every instinct since birth. And then, on the far edge of the clearing, they appeared. Shapes emerged first in shadow, then in light. Massive bodies, slow-moving, their gray backs glinting faintly under the rising sun. Dust lifted around their feet as they advanced, a wall of quiet strength and memory. Among them, one figure broke forward, larger and swifter, ears fanning wide in urgency. The calf stopped. For a moment, it stood motionless. The distance between them holding more power than movement itself. Its trunk quivered in the air, sending out a cry that cracked with exhaustion and hope. The larger figure answered at once, a deep, rolling rumble that shook the ground. The herd slowed, then parted slightly, leaving space for the matriarch to come forward. The calf moved again, stumbling into a trot, its limp pronounced but driven by something greater than pain. The rangers held back, watching in silence as the gap closed. The mother reached her calf, trunk sweeping low, curling around the small body in a gesture both searching and certain. She touched the bandaged leg, then moved along its back, pressing gently as though confirming what her senses already told her, that this was hers, returned from absence. The calf pressed against her, body leaning hard into her massive frame, trembling not with fear now but with the release of solitude. A low, drawn-out rumble vibrated through the air, joined by others from the herd as they surrounded them. The family closed ranks, their trunks crossing, brushing, weaving over the calf in touches of recognition. The dust rose higher, golden in the first light of day, turning the reunion into something that felt sacred in its simplicity. The rangers stood in the distance, still and wordless. They knew better than to step closer, to intrude upon what belonged only to the herd. Their work was done, though the wild itself had carried the greater weight. The mother's call, the calf's endurance, the instinct stronger than any wound. The calf turned once, head lifting toward the men who had stood with it through the night. Its eyes caught the light, dark and unreadable, yet filled with presence. For a moment it held there, trunk swaying slightly as though marking the memory. Then it turned back, pressing again into its mother's side, following the slow advance of the herd as they began to move together into the open plain. The rangers remained still, their figures small against the expanse. None spoke. There was no need. What had unfolded before them was beyond language, carried instead in the rhythm of the herd's steps, in the quiet trust that had bridged the gap between human and animal for a brief, fragile time. The elephants moved further, their silhouettes blending with the horizon. The mother guided her calf, keeping it close, her body angled to shield its weaker side. The herd's rumbling voices echoed once more, fading slowly as distance stretched between them. The sound lingered in the air even after they were gone, like a hymn left behind in the silence of dawn. The men lowered their eyes at last, turning back toward their camp with slow steps. Behind them, the dust began to settle. The space they left was empty now, save for the marks of heavy feet pressed deep into the soil, signs of a passage, of a return that would be remembered only in silence. The sun lifted higher, its first warmth spreading across the land. Wind stirred through the tall grass, bending it gently, carrying with it the faintest echo of that reunion. The rangers paused once more, listening, though nothing remained now but the whisper of morning. And in that quiet, it was enough.